About where the music industry was and is going, and it's in a really interesting spot right now because it's kind of being destroyed by the digital age, and I think this is a really great thing. Not because it's being destroyed necessarily, because it's gone through changes a lot in history, and it's a normal thing. And so throughout the 20th century, from sheet music to records to radio, corporations, either adapted or they died if they couldn't adapt to it. But the music industry is always going through changes, and it's to try to figure out where the music industry is headed, and we have to figure out where it was and where it's going to go, and where the slides are going to go.
Yeah.
So the internet really was the biggest change. Sheet music to record players to all these things. The internet was the biggest effect on all this because all of a sudden everything was really granularized, and the big companies didn't really know how to monetize it anymore, unlike the other ones where it was pretty obvious when radio came along, you could jump on that bandwagon, this bandwagon. So right now, all of the big record companies are kind of struggling to figure out how they're going to survive in this market. And again, this is tracing that transition. So, I think it's good. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, it is.
No, it's back on track.
You just talk fast.
So yeah. But yeah, so throughout this history, though, one thing to keep in mind is that the roots, the foundations are always the same. And it's always driven by this local bands and a word-of-mouth industry. And sometimes that gets lost when all the sales are in something that's a totally different subject. But right now, it's actually really much more obvious. And it's not just music that's fueling this, it's all of media. And it's trying to realize that all of these web companies are focusing on these specific things that they do very well. And the companies like big newspapers, who are very much generalists, they don't know what to do anymore because they can't compete. So we have to look back to this foundation of the local people, like musicians, who are just doing their thing. Right now, the music industry is pretty much owned by 4 big companies. And it started out that way in the early 20th century, but it hasn't always been that way. In the 60s, there was a lot of different record labels. But it's kind of strange how these record labels operate. It's kind of this gambling system where they basically lose money on almost all of the people that they have in their label, and they make a huge amount of money from very few, usually just one person, from various few people. And this is a model that works well with that mass audience that you saw for like MTV, but it's not going to work in the new internet economy. Here's a good example when you look at what a CD used to cost $16. And all of this black right here is label overhead. So the question is, if you don't need a label anymore, then all of a sudden it makes sense that you shouldn't have to buy a CD for $16. So it's not just that things like Napster are just ruining the music industry, there's a reason why. So musicians need to ask, do I need a label? And if not, what new tools do I need to be able to run my own services in a new way? And that's what we have to look for the internet to provide. So I got pretty excited about this a little bit ago and wanted to even think about doing a net startup. And I was trying to think, how do we provide these services for musicians? And I tried to break down the music industry today, what it looks like, because it's very different from what it was before. And we have things like blogger DJs, who, now it's not just big DJs on big radio stations. Now it's all these little people who are trying to come up with a following with their DJ blogs. And here's a simple sketch on what a website might look like for a musician who just wants to plan a tour. And lots of small businesses have been provided by, or the internet has provided them services, but musicians just haven't been, because no one's really taking them seriously as a business. So why don't musicians have basic tools to plan a tour, to follow their statistics, like even bloggers have? And so this is something I actually found this website that's out there that's doing something like what I was hoping to maybe do, and I'm still trying to do something. And Reverb Nation is on it, and they're doing a great job. And this is something that you're going to start seeing. And it's going to enable musicians to break out of their labels and to really form themselves as a brand, kind of like a blogger is, that has a voice and that's going to sell that voice. And they have tools to kind of build themselves up in whatever way they want to across whatever media platform, and then trickle that down into widgets onto whatever the platform. So they're not going to be owned by websites or labels anymore. And everyone kind of understands that music is going towards free at this point. It's just starting to be talked about, but everyone knows that's where it's headed. And at first it seems like, how do you monetize free music? But even Gmail didn't know, or even Google didn't know how they were going to monetize themselves until like 2003 or 4. So there is ways, it's just not very obvious. On the other hand, you can fall into the category of just assuming if you have traffic that it means monetization, and that's not true either. So there's lots of buzzwords out there, and sometimes it just might seem like, oh, the money will just come, but you don't really understand what's going on. But on the other hand, again, Obama's campaign is a great example where it proves that by tapping this long tail market of the social networking, friend word of mouth network, it really does make a huge difference that was unprecedented in history and that can form just unbelievable audiences. So maybe musicians can start to have ad campaigns like that. These are kind of, in a way, just pretty pictures. But they also are ways that people are starting to visualize information on the internet in new ways that they've never tried to do before. And it goes to show that these are all graphs of people's listening history for music. And so we don't know what it's going to look like, but we know the music is going to go towards free. So eventually we're going to have to face the fact that something like this is probably going to be possible, whatever it looks like in the future. So someone's listening history is going to supply information with all these other apps, and it's all going to blend together, and it's going to be really cool to see what happens.
Wow.